You're listening to The Psychedelic Couch. Before we delve into today's episode, which includes conversation around psychedelics, we want to remind our listeners that the use of illicit drugs carries significant risks and legal consequences. Psychedelic substances, including but not limited to LSD, psilocybin, DMT and MDMA, are classified as illegal in many countries, including here in the UK. The possession, distribution and consumption of these substances can result in legal penalties, including fines and imprisonment. Furthermore, the use of psychedelics can have profound effects on one's mental and physical health. While some individuals report positive experiences, such as expanded consciousness and therapeutic benefits, others may experience negative effects, such as anxiety, paranoia, and psychosis. These substances can also interact unpredictably with medications and exacerbate underlying mental health conditions. They are also not suitable for anyone under the age of 25. It's essential to approach the topic of psychedelics with caution and responsibility. The views and experiences shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be interpreted as encouragement or advocacy for the use of illegal substances. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance abuse, we encourage you to seek support from qualified healthcare professionals or local addiction support services. With that said, let's proceed with today's episode, keeping in mind the importance of informed discussion and harm reduction. So good morning, ZackieL. Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. So I thought I might start by introducing you, if that's okay.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I'm really happy to be here.
ZackieL is a visionary singer-songwriter of folkloric global soul music, a player of guitar, percussions, and handpan. A multidisciplinary artist, he is also a field recordist, studied in ethnomusicology, an event organizer and MC, a firekeeper, a poet and writer. He's organised and headlined many dozens of events and projects worldwide over many years' worth of travels. He recently went to the Peruvian Amazon as a field recordist for Universal Pictures. Living with Shipibo Kanibo traditional healers, he studied their practices and recorded their Icaros, the medicine songs that so illuminate ayahuasca ceremonies. One of these recordings is featured on the award-winning film Tar, starring Cate Blanchett. He is Comms and Events Director of Village 101 Community Interest Company, a London-based Black-led artists, collective and cultural initiative dedicated to reclaiming the narrative through innovative art, decolonial education and regenerative culture. Welcome, good morning.
Good morning, greetings.
So I wondered maybe you could start by telling us about your music, folkloric global soul music.
Well, I suppose I came up with that idea as I had so many people asking me what kind of music I make, often obviously meaning what kind of genre of music I make. And I was tired of not knowing what on earth to say in response. So I invented that name, that idea. It dawned on me over the space of about a year and a half or so, I remember. So soul, because essentially I'm a soul singer. All my favorite singers are the soul singers of the genre of soul and of neo soul as well. These big heroes of mine. And also because even though I don't make music that is really influenced in the musicality of it by soul, it's from and for the soul in its intentionality. And global, because every element of the composition has been influenced and inspired by so many traditions of music from all over the world. There's a lot of West African blues in the guitar styles. There's a lot of Latin percussion in the percussive ways I play the guitar, as well as the fact I play congas, I play Latin percussion, Afro-Latin percussion. There's many other influences, flamenco, and so many more than I could say quickly. And folkloric, because what I'm doing is giving a nod, is giving respect to the ancestral purposes of music, as well as being contemporarily relevant with the kind of music I make. I'm appreciating the customs and traditions that have always been the reason why humanity has made music through the ages. So it's not that it's folk music per se, although many different forms of folk music have inspired mine, but it's that ancestral essence of music.
Mm. Yeah, and tell me more about that. You know, when I hear you talk about that ancestral connection, I think about, you know, the healing. Think about that connection to your roots. Tell me more about how writing music kind of connects you in that way.
I've had the fortune of having traveled a huge amount and having come into contact, having witnessed so many different forms of music, and a lot of them that are for the sake of devotional practice, for ritualistic in essence and in practice. And every step of the way, it's felt as if that's been the real calling of my music also. It's the reason I make it is for the healing benefits that it's had in my own life. How much it's allowed me to grow as a person, the states of consciousness that I'm able to access through music that so then guide the rest of my life, and have allowed me to go from many situations of hardship in my own life to plenty confidence, to plenty ability to give huge amount to others. Also having witnessed the kind of rituals and ceremonies where music is so clearly such an activator, such an amplifier, as well as such a source of energy that allows people to go into states that are so much greater, so much larger, that are in such a profound quality of connection. And that's always what I'm attempting to harness and to expand with my own music making, my own performances. That's always the intentionality, is to allow that very sacred something to 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 break through into the space, for the cracks to open, for the light to shine in.
That's so beautiful. And I'm guessing that it's in that space that creativity really flows.
Of course, the real essence of creativity, is so much of the time that it's, okay, I'm sat down for the songwriting process and thinking through some great ideas and everything, but it's still very mental. It's still attempting to do that and making some things that are really wonderful and everything, but it's still nothing at all in comparison to to when those moments that we're all seeking, and we're all attempting to create the spaces that facilitate that as musicians, as many forms of creatives, artists, performers, ceremony workers, healers. When it's you're no longer attempting to do something, but you're opening up.
Yeah, and what is it that really does that for you? You know, how do you step into that space? I mean, is there a knowing of how to, or is it, tell us more about what happens for you to access that?
Well, I suppose I haven't reached the point in my mastery of my craft, I suppose, when I know just how to tap into it like that. I know that being surrounded by excellent musicians and other kinds of performers who tap into that space very much so, and are truly excellent at what they do, and have an amazing way of supporting one another and truly listening to one another. So when I perform, or even just I'm in jam spaces, collaborative spaces of that kind, and suddenly it happens, we all feel it and we all know it immediately. It's a shift in energy. That's so it's who you're surrounded by. It's something that's definitely a lot harder to achieve when you're performing alone or playing alone. It's something that happens in interaction with others in group spaces. That's sure. Another thing that helps massively is dances. When you're playing as a musician, you've got people dancing, or you've got performing dancers, and the dancers tend to have an incredible way of tapping into that liminal space and amplifying energy enormously. So when I'm playing with really amazing dancers, and we're playing with each other, that's a speciality of mine that I love as a musician, is being danced by the dancer in my music, and the dancer is being danced by my music, and we're both listening to each other, watching each other, deeply in connection with the exchange, and it's happening in improvisation. So that's the three things. Other amazing musicians, dancers, and a true listening, being in a mental awareness and a space to be 90% in a state of listening to what's happening around you in a real awareness. And there's definitely some more factors. Those are the ones that come to mind right now.
And I'm thinking, when you're in that space, during, after, as you integrate after that process, what does the healing look like for you? Can you describe that? I mean, as you were describing it, I could feel my chest soften. I could feel something physiologically happening in my system in response to you describing that liminal space. And I'm just curious what happens in the moment when you're in that flow, and then afterwards.
Well, I suppose anybody who's gone and had an amazing night, an amazing dance, who's experienced a fantastic concert, or who's experienced a ceremony where people are entering clearly altered states of perspective of consciousness and expanded states of ecstasy, they're often called as well in academic scenes. They're called ecstatic states. And then the most profound, I'd say, there's lots of different states that have subtle differences, but I think all of them are very importantly interconnected and can be very much together in being similar states. What's often called a spirit possession, an ancestral possession, and deity possession as well, which happens in a lot of different cultures. That's going to be the most profound, certainly that I know of. Other people will call that mediumship. All of them have been things that I've witnessed firsthand, and to an extent have experienced them myself. So all of them have got very different experiences as they're happening, and experiences afterwards. I mean, when they're most expansive, when it's its most profound, that I don't remember what's happened in those moments. And I know people lose consciousness in that sense, but then afterwards of elation, of course, I've been highly energized, and that continuing for a very long time, and suddenly life having a quality and essence that's wonderful.
New insights happening kind of in the process, or shortly after, the impact on dreams, kind of that shifting, or that experience of something unfurling in the system as the sort of somatic process unwinds.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us more about different kind of regions or traditions that you've noticed or experienced on your travels?
I suppose I could go through the story of my travels a little. When I was 16, I first had an experience of an initiation into shamanic practices by my godmother. She was introduced into what she came to call shamanic practice through her grandfather. She's of Irish heritage. He's an Irishman. He was very much the village healer, and he had been carried down his line and taught from a grandparent to a grandchild, and a parent to a child. And it came to her, and through other studies that she'd had in her life, especially in practices of core shamanism, as it's called, she developed what she called a shamanic practice, and those kind of abilities. And she was part of a particular school, a particular culture, a particular way of thought. And we were in Sweden at the time. I was joining her on it was a pilgrimage walk, and she was calling herself Earth Rights Walker, and she was doing environmental activism, speaking on radio shows and conferences along the ways and that kind of thing. And I joined her for 10 days, and halfway through we found this stone circle and decided that was the space for it. And it was the first time I experienced the otherworldliness of someone entering that kind of trance state, and that was a soul retrieval, as it's often called. She found my spirit guide. Later that day, I had a set of experiences that would change my life forever, my understanding of how life works, the interdimensionality of life. And it was very initiating as an experience. And soon afterwards, I had the first experience of shamanic drumming. So it's Scandinavian as well as North American traditions, really, but there can be many different traditions around the world that lead to what we know as shamanic drumming. That's using the frame drum, with single tone, made out of an animal skin, and a wooden frame, and hit with a very fast rhythm, a very deep, bassy, fast rhythm, and used for the purpose of shamanic journey, as it's called, for the sake of entering into a trance state, being guided to receive very profound answers about and wisdoms. Shamanic drumming from those kind of traditions was introduced as young as 16. When I was 20, I went traveling. I was supposed to only be 6 months to Australia. I ended up away for 19 months. I was in Australia for 10 of those. I went to India, to Nepal, to Thailand. And in Australia, I came into a lot of connection with Aboriginal keepers of wisdom, custodians, elders, and traditions. I realized how similar it was. Didgeridoo, extremely entrancing sound of the didgeridoo, which is very similar to the rhythm and the frequency of the shamanic drum. The tempo, which is tapped on two sticks of hardwood as well, and the kind of chanting, and then the entranced states of dance and movement that many performers of these customs of this particular music form will enter into. They embody the animal, the totem animal of their people, of their tribe. As many differing forms of Aboriginal performance and everything, but they were very inspiring to me, and I had some incredible teachers when I was in Australia. And in Australia too, of course, I had my first experiences with Bhakti yoga and mantra, devotional singing circles that is sort of similar to the kind of devotional singing circles that Hare Krishnas will have, but other forms of Bhakti yoga. And also I experienced trance music, so psytrance music and the party scenes, which is, of course, in many elements of its aesthetics and its intention, is following the same kind of music. And the idea is to be entrancing. And a lot of the time they borrow from a lot of different shamanic cultures, indigenous cultures around worldwide, their particular sounds and aesthetics. And I mean, it's just fascinating, isn't it? That it's a party scene, but very inspired by that. And the question asked about to what extent, even though it's modernized and it's with big electronic sound systems and DJs and the substances that people consume and everything, it's to what extent it's following on from traditions that go back however far in humanity. And then I was in India, and of course, you arrive in India, you're immediately surrounded by an endless amount of the most intense spiritual devotion and the most intense music you can possibly imagine. Is constant. It's so loud. India is so loud. This clashing sound, and I had so many of the most amazing experiences of my life, and so many incredible experiences of music. First one that comes to my mind is the first experience I had of somebody entering into a spirit possession, into a trance that is clearly very, very powerful, and is carried by certain customs and traditions that facilitate that to happen. The responses are also customary, and therefore the energetic response that happens in a space, in a group of people, is so intensely feelable, even if you're not particularly part of it, you're observing. With the partner I was with at the time, we went and joined a festival that was happening at a particular Hindu temple. It was one of the accolades of Kali. I can't remember which one now. And we were the only tourists there. We were the only foreigners there. We traveled a long way to get there, and there were thousands of people around this temple. It was an incredible spectacle, an incredible moment. And there was music being played very intensely, tabla and singing, and a form of violin over loudspeakers. And there was a group of women that were in the middle of this large courtyard that was on the outside of the temple, who were dancing, shaking, and singing along to the music. And it was sort of unclear what they were doing exactly. and then just sort of standing close by and observing, taking it all in, talking to these kids that we were hanging out with, and suddenly something happened. There was a split in the air, and one of the women started shaking very intensely, and all of the other women started screeching, screaming. And the shift in energy in the air, I'll never forget. I'll never forget how my body was immediately covered in goosebumps. And the electricity that ran up my spine was immense. And it probably only lasted a minute or so, or less. I can barely remember. But I knew something incredibly profound had happened. And other experiences in India, yeah, there's too many to go through. There's so many forms of devotional music. I suppose there's qawwali as well. I've spoken about a Hindu tradition. There's also a Sufi Muslim tradition, which is qawwali singing. Have you ever heard of qawwali before?
I've never heard qawwali, no.
The most famous singer is Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who's probably he's like the Bob Marley of Southern Asia. I mean, everybody knows him. So many people absolutely adore him and his music. His songs will be 20 minutes long or so, and it's devotional music played with a harmonium and very entrancing, amazing percussion. Big groups of singers with a lead singer and often a second lead singer, and they play off against the call and responses against each other. And it's so ecstatic. It's the most incredible music. And I got to play with some qawwali musicians. It was an amazing experience. We met each other on a long train journey and just spent hours playing on this train with everybody sort of peeking over, looking at it. And it's similar qawwali in its entrancing properties and the kind of states that people go into in those spaces that qawwali music is designed with. It's amazing the similarities that you see throughout so many traditions around the world. And also the incredible variations in how people are entering very similar states, but all of them culturally guided and culturally informed.
And reminding us that this is what humans have done for thousands of years. It's the way that we would enter the world, listening to the drum, and the way that we would end our lives, within ceremony, within that holding of our people. And it feels that, as you say, I mean, I suppose if we go to a dance floor in Ibiza, we might connect to it, but in everyday life, it feels lost somewhere, that we've maybe lost that connection. Innately we know it to be there, but that the power is so profound. I was thinking this morning, I was doing with my Kundalini practice, I always do a kind of chant at the end of my morning practice, and I was doing the Kirtan Kriya, which is very short, sort of 12 minutes. There's a longer version as well. And there's been lots of research on that. So there was a psychiatrist in the States that was specialised in Alzheimer's, and looked at the impact of having two groups of people, one of which was doing a yogic practice, but centralising on the chanting afterwards, and found a real impact on the impact of cognitive function, of emotional regulation. So if there was something as simple as having Alzheimer's patients do a 20-minute or 10-minute chant every day, such a simple tool, that's innate in all of us.
What would be the effect on the Alzheimer's patient?
Yeah, it will improve cognitive function potentially, which is fascinating, right?
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
And I'm always reminded, sitting in the seat of therapist, very much governed by science, just because evidence isn't necessarily present in all of these different traditions doesn't mean that they lack efficacy. That a lack of evidence doesn't mean that they're not effective.
Well, of course, something that to do with the unseen, that to do with the supernatural, that to do with the worldly. Of course, they're dismissed.
Yeah, and being shut down again, in thinking about the history of these traditions, very much women were at the center of these practices. And with the rise of patriarchy, that was shut
Mhm.
down.
Mm.
The same with these ancient traditions, right? It doesn't fit into the framework of patriarchy and modern medicine.
Mhm. And a lot of Christian belief, a lot of Abrahamic religious belief as well. I think that was a big element of how Western cultural norms decided to shut down that element of the human condition, to forbid it in many cases. Um, of course, so many, I use a phrase like spirit possession, and the first reaction that many people are gonna have is that's you're talking about something that this is, often that would be associated with witchcraft, with devil work, with the idea of being possessed. Usually, the only thing you think of being possessed by is a negative spirit or the devil, and that's very inhued in our culture
Mm.
and in our conceptions of the world. And of course, there are some elements of the spiritual traditions and the customs where it's definitely, it's there some black magical elements are involved in why you would enter a particular trance state, and music can have a part of that. Of course, that exists because that's the reality of the human condition. But there are so many traditions that incorporate possession that are explicitly and very powerfully for the purposes of doing healing work,
Mm, mm.
and to incredible effect.
Well, maybe you could tell me a little bit more about the misconceptions of shamanic drumming. There's something about the role of history, right? And I'm thinking about the proliferation of witch hunts
Mm.
in this country and
How it's always been misframed
mm,
and so misunderstood, and therefore either judged heavily, either to some extent a fear being attached to it, or at least downplayed and seen as something that isn't serious enough. That it's fascinating, isn't it?
mm,
We do have plenty elements of this kind of work that is embedded in certain parts of our culture there, but they're quite periphery. I mean, there's the Pentecostal Christians, for example, who do you know about their traditions?
mm,
Speaking tongues, entering into trance states there. And I would argue that the side trance scenes, that a lot of the party scenes, that there is a part of the intention within them is to enter those into trance states, expanded states. All of the attachment and the conceptions that are attached to shamanic drumming, to our ideas of shamanic traditions, what we call Wicca and witchcraft, and they are present, aren't they? You go into many bookshops, and there's the esoteric section that has plenty about it. There's many festivals. You'll go to many festivals, and there will be the element of the healing field where that's very present. But it's just so fascinating that even though it's such a embedded part in our culture, and we're still alive in the UK and other Western cultures, that it's held at the peripheral. That it's very much a peripheral thing, very much seen that way by the majority,
mm,
and in ways that it might be misconstrued, that and even negatively downplayed. It's projected upon that it's to do with the dark, with witchcraft, with wanting to do harm onto others and everything. At the Halloween projection and view of what the witch is, for example, that's taught to our children, and the idea of what a witch is through in all the children's cartoons and all of this trope, this mold that is framed in, as opposed to being a source of an amplification of incredible modalities of healing.
mm. Yeah, I wonder, there's obviously a big part to do with religion, with kind of Christianity, with patriarchy, this just idea that women, I'm not sure how many men were caught up in those witch hunts in the Reformation. It would be interesting to know, but it was predominantly women, right?
Definitely, of course. It's predominantly women also who traditionally will enter forms of trance states and spirit possessions, being possessed by ancestors, and who are mediums. That's definitely a common trend. Another common trend is that you often have people that are very much between the sexes, who very much embody both energies. They're very often that person in the culture, traditionally as well as by chance, who enters those states the most. That seems to be a particular place of particular power when you're and sensitivity and liminality, in more able to access those liminal states when they're between the sexes.
And between worlds, it almost feels.
Exactly. You're a bridge between the unseen and the seen.
Do you see any difference between, when you think of drumming and we think of chanting, do you see them as one and the same thing, that their ability, what they can do neurologically, physiologically to our system? Do you see them as separate, or are they?
Well, yeah, of course they're separate and used separately in different traditions, and used together with a lot of very important connection between them and different connections. I wouldn't be able to speak on what they're doing biochemically to change states of perception, to enhance states of perception. But I can say how they feel as a musician and as an observer of those kind of traditions, in order to facilitate a space, to open a space and hold a space of a heightened energy and of rhythm. It brings you into the human state, the thing that we all have innately within us that can be accessed and also increasingly trained, which is moving and being and acting. And there are many books worth of great wisdom and observation of what exactly the drum is for and what it does. But I know that I would never want any of my music to not have a very strong rhythmic element, because of that power that it has. The voice and what the voice is used for in chanting. I mean, often the most powerful and expanded state inducing singing and chanting is rhythmic. Also, it goes in very strong cycles that bring you into that inner dance, as well as maybe the natural dance. And but also I see it as the color. I see it as a soulfulness and emotionality, particular frequencies that are reached, that are often experimented with. That what it does is it touches the heart, and it allows us to expand the heart, and often, especially in many different forms of devotional music, it allows us to expand a very loving state.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned frequency. So the science is that both chanting and drumming do that. They will entrain the brainwave into kind of alpha state, theta state. And in those places, in those altered states, relaxation manifests, focus. We know that when we have kind of heart-brain coherence, again, that's really restorative for the system. Periods of time during the day spent in those states through meditation often is a way that people can do that. Creates better health outcomes for people. So we know that happens.
Well, that's definitely my experience.
Mm.
Amazing one. If I haven't made music for a few days, I sort of start, because I'm being very busy with other things. It's just sort of something comes over me. It's like something's missing.
That's interesting, because it almost, I could imagine, it feels a bit jittery. There's something in this where there's something that happens in the process of engaging in this for you that will be grounding. And for my clients, trauma clients that I'm working with, there are certain humming that you can ask someone to do. Rhythmic movement all helps to ground the system, bring the person into kind of a parasympathetic nervous state, just calms that and regulates their bodily experience. So important.
And I'd say also liberate and empower. But also, something's missing, as well as something is a little bit more on the anxious side, and the less settled and the less grounded and less calm. doing both those things at the same time is that I'm more centered and more grounded when I'm playing and after I've played, but also I'm liberated in my expression and feel far more empowered and energized and confident.
And stimulating neurotransmitters, release of dopamine, all those wonderful chemicals.
It's what draws me to the handpan also as a musical instrument. It can be the same. It can be very exhilarating, exciting, stimulating. I tend to play in a way that's very percussive, very rhythmic. But the particular frequencies that it's accessing are ones that it's incredible how magnetizing it is as an instrument. And there's many instruments that people find particularly beautiful, but there's a particular quality to the handpan that means you play it in a public space, people would just come with such a gravity. It's incredible. And the children especially. The children tend to absolutely love the sound of the handpan and feel it and be glued, and just dance. That's how it's spoken about, that the particular harmony that it reaches are so favorable, are so smooth, are so enticing, are so sweet that it just touches a part of the soul that is so endearing.
How long have you been playing it?
The handpan.
Yeah.
When I first saw it, I must have been 14, 15. I saw some videos. It was like, I know I'm going to play this instrument. And I don't know when, I don't know how, but it's going to happen. When I was traveling in my early 20s, there were a couple of people I traveled with, friends I made. I first got the opportunities to play a bit. And then I was 22, 23. I was back home from traveling. I moved in with some good friends who had one. I got to play a lot. The partner I had at the time, then I had one as well, and we were performing a lot using the instrument. And then I got my own 4 years ago.
Well, yeah, it was so beautiful watching you play. I can testify that was an incredible experience.
What's wonderful about the instrument is that it's a new form of instrument. Well, there's the steel pan that came out of the Caribbean, and the traditions that surround the steel pan, which are proud and very beautiful, and then there were some other influences of the instrument and its acoustic properties and everything, but it's only 20 years old, or 23 years old now, actually, as an instrument. And there's so much that can be explored in its musicality and its composition, and how we played with this instrument. It can still be experimented with in a whole lot of different ways.
If people wanted to start somewhere, what would you recommend?
With any instrument or with the handpan?
With both. With thinking about drumming, thinking about the power of this practice, where might be a good place to start?
It's something I believe in so potently. It's such an important part of my life and my musicality and it's informed by so many of my experiences around the world and seeing other cultures and how they approach music. Is that it really is for everyone, that it's a birthright. It's so part of what we're here for, is to sing and to chant and to dance and to gather together and to be players of instruments. And it's not something that should ever be professionalized too much, that should ever have too much of an elite and a hierarchical status, and therefore a judgment and a closure, and that lack of musical liberty imposed on so many people who close themselves off and judge themselves and don't feel free to express themselves, and don't feel free, therefore, to harmonize with others at enough of an extent that really causes those states of great expansion. And how to start, where to begin. I've always taught music in the moments that I haven't done it professionally yet so much, but there's been many moments I've given classes and guided people through their music. And for me, it always begins with playing together and it's always with others. You come together, you harmonize, you connect, and you get into a rhythm, you really feel the rhythm and you start to develop your ability to keep to the rhythm, and you experiment and you explore and you have fun.
Mm.
You play something very simple, very, very simple at the beginning. As long as you're in the right rhythm together,
Yeah.
keep it simple and continue to just stay in a simple pattern, something that won't worry you, make that feeling of stress that you might easily fall out, or something that you know you can keep in its wholesomeness, and allow it to overcome, allow yourself to be completely absorbed by that rhythm, by the feeling of that music, and from there see if you can begin to experiment and open up, but only if it comes quite naturally.
Mm.
I think that's the starting place, and always with, as opposed to too much of strict regimen and discipline. All of that is very important, of course, if you want to master the craft. It's the hours a day, if you want to become as best as you can, of course, are really necessary. And the best times of my life has been when I've been managing to keep up hours a day of discipline and practice, of course, but only if and when it's making you feel alive, and you're loving it. You're really loving it. And I think
Mm.
especially doing it with others and you're practicing together.
Mm.
Learning teacher is great, especially if they're a cool and open and fun teacher that you really feel you get on with well. But I think with good friends who are at similar levels, but also even advanced musicians, but the kind that don't have that musical snobbery that so many artists suffer.
Yeah, yeah, the fear of not being good enough kicks in and then you don't do it. But just simply even playing at home, playing with your kids, playing with
Mm-hmm.
your friends, just allowing that experience just to bring pleasure, to kind of connect into that essence of being alive.
Absolutely. And with kids is often the best.
Absolutely. My daughter got a drum last year. She traveled she traveled around with it everywhere. It was so sweet. I mean, it's so sweet still. And I was going to bring it up actually for the call and show you. It's such a cool little drum. And she'll just sit and play, and then we'll make up songs, and it's all very silly, but the joy that we have from just connecting, being in that space together. Um,
That's beautiful.
yeah.
Of course, that's the big element of what it does. Is it when I'm talking about being liberated emotionally and energetically, is because it's the child within us that's bubbling up and come to the surface and go, I can play now.
Yeah.
If the body has been disciplined to the point, not disciplined, but the neural networks have been enforced enough that you can sing freely and well, and you can play well at the same time as being in the state of the freedom of the child that knows how much the energy is building and how fantastic that is. That's when the real fun begins.
Mm. Yes, I suppose thinking about the connectivity with each other, but also within our system,
Mm,
that impact of practicing, having that rhythm, having that sensory experience, again, builds neurons throughout the system
mm,
and, physically creates connectivity.
absolutely. Yeah, that's why it being culturally supported, the different kind of rituals that involve devotional music, ritualistic music, healing music, that have it it's a custom, it's a tradition, and ancestrally speaking, it's been continued for a very long way and maybe evolved in certain ways. It has different subcultures and offshoots and different forms, but it's still culturally facilitated. That's why it's really important, because children have been learning it from a really young age, and therefore it's part of their bodies. And as well as everybody's been witnessing it, and they know how to take on particular almost archetypal roles, custodianship kind of roles in those spaces, and therefore facilitate those ritual spaces and make sure that they're energetically attuned in the right way also.
Mm. What do you see as the future for this? I mean, it's so ingrained in our history, but where do you see the use of kind of drumming, chanting really take us forward?
Mm.
What's your hope?
Well, of course, the big hope is that it becomes more embedded, It becomes more of a tradition in more cultures, in our own cultures. The what we would call the well-being communities, the spiritual scenes, the holistic practice and spiritual practice kind of gatherings that is now a culture that's very much developing. It's become very much part of everyday life, and everybody gathers together, and it's a mixture of borrowing from many indigenous practices from around the world and other practices and other cultural practices, as well as ways of connecting to what we perceive to be our own. And I've never experienced more joy and more freedom and more openness and more sincere connection than in those spaces. And I've got, and everybody else, so many others share exactly the same experience. So I've got no doubt that that's going to grow, and that's going to become more accessible to more people. And what's going to be fascinating is the ways that it diversifies and becomes more eccentric in some areas of it, and then more accessible to larger groups of people, to more mainstream audiences in other ways. And I want all of it to happen.
And that it could be an adjunct onto kind of conventional medicine. I haven't read the article, but someone pointed out to me yesterday that this week in the one of the medical journals, there was a piece of research looking at dance compared to conventional therapy. And I believe that there was really, really good outcomes. Now, when we're in a system where people can't get to see therapists, they can't get to see mental health practitioners, being able to use, drumming, chanting, dance as a way to be able to tap into to our healing modality, for me feels really important that it's there, it's in our system. How can we start creating groups that are more mainstream to be able to really utilize that?
I think it exists already in a lot of mainstream circles also. That's really exciting. If you've been to a really good dance, the kind where a circle opens up in the middle and people dance off against each other, and people naturally come into their roles and open that space for that to happen. That can happen. Not the most mainstream clubs, no. But it can still happen at plenty. It's in a lot of contemporary and plentifully mainstream cultures around Afrobeats, for example. Amapiano is a big one where it's a modern music form and dance form that's all the rage at the moment. That's really popular. Those kind of dances, spaces open for people to really express.
Yeah.
Young people to tap into energetic states that are so heightened, and I think it could be explored. The curiosity of what is really happening there could be better introduced, and it could be taken more seriously by those who are studying different forms of therapy and different healing modalities, and therefore more embraced. But at the same time, so often the ways that we heal one another and heal ourselves through incredible spectacles of heightened energy and expanded states, I don't particularly need to be talked about by anyone, because we know already. We know why we're going and doing that. It happens. So they're organic cultural processes, because it seems to be so incredibly embedded, not only in our customs that are carried through lineages and through culture, but in the human condition. And I definitely argue that. I definitely believe that.
I have a friend and colleague who's doing his PhD currently on tango, and as a couples therapist, he's a couples therapist as well. I'm really excited to see the findings that he kind of creates or puts together from his research.
I've got a good friend of mine, a man he's 77 or 78, if I remember correctly. He lives in the next village from where I am now in southern France. A wonderful man, can often be quite timid. He's a singer as well, I found out that he's a tango master, and he often has big tango gatherings at his house. And I was invited once, and so in awe of all of these folks in their 60s, 70s, 80s, even dancing so gracefully and so energized and absolutely loving it. And him in particular at 77, skipping all around that dance floor. So elegant and powerful, and for hours they went all night. I got tired before they got tired. It's clearly tango is another one of the dance traditions that has so much power for doing so much good. And it's so ridiculous, isn't it? So it's hilarious that in so many therapeutic traditions and our ideas of how best to heal, that sitting in a room and the energy being quite base, not going anywhere particularly exciting, and talking about things quite somberly, and which is very important because you have to go deep into the subjects, and of course so many different other psychoanalytical processes I completely agree with. I was in psychotherapy since I was 19 also. Well, I had a good amount of sessions around that time of my life anyway. And I really see the benefit, but to have only that one-sided view of best for really tapping deep into the best parts of the human psyche and earthliness, that really does good for us, and forgetting the way that humanity across the globe adores and is so liberated by different forms of music and dance and other cultural forms and other forms of the arts is wild, is mad.
Yeah, and of course it's both and. We're so cognitive, right? We're so cerebral, and the invitation for all of us is to get back into the body, really connect with the body. So it's both and. And as a sex therapist, I'm so reminded of that. There's only so far talking goes, right? We have to really embody, we have to process, we have to kind of work through, unfurl those blocks to really become congruent within our systems so that we can be in relational spaces with others.
That's such an essential work. And of course that link can be made between music and dance and those forms, and sexual energy and the liberation of sexual energy, and that being clearly very healthy in many different forms, many different ways. Those I was talking about, Afrobeats, Amapiano, a lot of the time, very sexually charged, amazingly charged, and that means people are really coming alive and experiencing so much joy.
Really connecting to that erotic experience.
Absolutely. It's when it's made free, when it's unjudged, when it's the opposite of judged, it's celebrated. Well, it means celebrating the whole spectrum of our humanity, as opposed to denying it and there being shame complexes.
Yeah, and shutting it down.
Yeah, exactly. The music and the dance provides the space for us to truly liberate and celebrate the fullness of our humanity and all of our different energy centers and the ways that we are most energized and excited. Of course, many people have made the link between sexual energy and creative energy. They're very similar in how they allow you to really express and to come to places of very authentic, very profound communication and everything that you can then give out to the world.
Absolutely. That connection to the life force, right? I often say when we're kind of talking to people about that erotic energy, I think there can be a misunderstanding that erotic energy is something that's just sexual, but actually, erotic being that connection with life, knowing that I'm alive, and in that the creativity flows.
Absolutely. It's that far deepened sense of altered perception from what is so what is so normalized and what is so expected in workplaces and social settings, to one that has such a deepened sensitivity. Often with that almost necessarily, and certain with more time and exploration, great deal of lovingness.
I was just thinking then, often, with sexuality, that we compartmentalize stuff, right? Now I'm in this mode, now I'm in that mode, now I'm showing up in the bedroom, now I've got to do this. But actually, if it's more that we're embodying that the whole time that we're in that, we're much closer to be able to connect to our sexuality, to connect to desires, which often people that come to see me are having issues around desire. That the fact that part of them feels shut off or blocked in some way, kind of reconnecting. And I love that you really notice that in music, or with the music, that the musicians that you work with, that flow, allowing that kind of sexual energy to flow.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the same for singers. Of course, that's why so often singers, especially, will become such sexual icons as well. Of course, because they're so powerfully expressive and of raw creative power, and certainly how it's felt in the moments when I'm at my most creatively expressive. It's not that I'm turned into a sex icon. I certainly hope that it wouldn't happen too much. For the purpose of there's many different elements and qualities of the music that I want to be noticed, rather than the elements of my sexual energy. But it's that incredible empowerment and liberation which allows us to harmonize and connect with others far more profoundly. That's what it's about. It's not about how we then view others, but then how we can really genuinely be in that sensitivity we're talking about, that awareness of the beauty and the subtleties and the light that is in the world. It's exactly the same for others, and how what we feel and what we can really perceive and how we can really, really connect with others.
That's so beautiful. So I was wondering if we could go on. Could you tell the listeners a little bit more about your work with decolonization?
Sure, absolutely. Where to begin? Well, it's this incredible feeling that so much of my life has geared me towards, has prepared me to play that role, to have this kind of consciousness, to have this awareness, to feel this in terms of justice very profoundly. So much of it to do with exactly what we were just talking about. So much of a deep and tender love for many friends of family and family members and great friends throughout my life, role models throughout my life, close ones who are descendants of colonized peoples, and then that awareness that built in that I'm a descendant of colonizers as a white English person by heritage. And slowly but surely it came into a realization that it feels like a biggest calling in my life to play the role that is necessary for many of my particular heritage, our particular heritage, being the descendants of the kind of ancestors that we have and the kind of things that they did, to play as much of a healing role in culture as possible, and to be part of the shifting of the narratives, the reclaiming of the narratives, to ensure that the continuation of colonial mentalities and attitudes and energetic interactions is being radically shifted for the sake of us being able to live in far more harmony between races and cultures and creeds and religious groups, and despite the immensity of the hardship, the torturous qualities that exist within so many of our lineages and still very alive amongst the vast majority of very unconscious.
Yeah, and how important it is to decolonize the well-being movement. And I'm thinking in terms of sort of mental health, psychotherapy. Again, it's still so live in my world, and the importance that we really see that, and we work collaboratively in changing.
Absolutely, yeah. We can't generalize the principles of the well-being movement. There's so many different variations of these movements,
that have evolved in different ways from different sources, but as well as being interconnected for sure. So they don't all hold the same principles for sure, but there are particular principles that seem to be commonalities between all of them, and common unity and a sense of community across the planet is definitely spoken about as being very important, isn't it? And respect and an honoring of indigenous traditions and heritage and forms, with the vast majority of those indigenous traditions being from the global south, being from colonized places, traditionally colonized places over the past 500 years. You'd have thought that these scenes, these cultures that share these kind of principles in general, would be the first to be really wanting to make sure to have a huge amount of consciousness when it comes to the remnants of colonial sentimentality and belief system and racial and racist mentalities, racist ways of being and interacting with others that of course they still exist. But you see that a little bit in some of these scenes. You see that happening, and I think it's happening quite rapidly, but it's definitely still lacking in a lot of these circles. Just the first elements of having a proper consciousness of it, having read into the most updated and the most profound literature that we have on these subjects, and thinking about it with suitable complexity and nuance, and having enough awareness of the self and the patterns of behavior and the ways that we've been conditioned and how we bring those into these spaces. There's definitely a lack of that in even those who are very proud of being the conscious next wave of humanity, and to at one level we really want to embrace lots of people from different cultures and backgrounds and different races to come together and come into those spaces. But then very notably, that's often very lacking. It's very much a rarity and doesn't represent actual demographics of populations properly. They're so often very white and very middle class spaces. 100%.
What is your hope with the work that you're doing? What is the aim?
To share as much of this kind of knowledge as possible, to open minds. But for me, particularly, it's open hearts. It's for me my first approach to making these changes and bringing about the shifts in this consciousness is through music, and is through art, and is through expression, and is through us really and properly and profoundly humanizing one another, because we see each other in each other's expression, and really and truly and authentically and sincerely harmonizing and connecting with one another through the power of the modalities and the realms that are created through music and dance, especially, and through other forms of healing circles and ceremonies and spaces and traditions, and for cultural reparations to be made, for the ability of those who are born into white privilege and to other forms of privilege that are specifically racialized, to be able to have a full awareness of what's going on and what they've been conditioned to believe, often very unconsciously, very deeply within them, and doing that self-work. And I believe there is a very serious level of work to be done in individuals as well as in communal spaces. And I've been through a lot of it when I was in South America and having my experiences with plant medicines of the Shipibo Kanibo and other indigenous holders of those spaces and facilitators of ceremonies with plant medicines. That was along with a huge array of different subjects and themes that were involved in the inner work that was happening. That was probably the biggest. It was definitely the biggest, and most impactful, and continued in terms of an inner process of healing work that I felt so cool to do long after I left South America in those particular ceremonial forms. Because I came into a very abrupt and strong confrontation with the fact that I was here as a descendant of white colonizers in captured land, in these areas of South America that have been heavily colonized and brutally colonized. I'd known little about it, got taught very little in school of what the British Empire had done. It got told that we hadn't learned anything at all, really. It had been bastardized and completely shifted into the actual reality of what had happened, shockingly so, all things considered. But I'd learned absolutely nothing at all about what the Spanish conquistadores had done in South America, the Portuguese as well, of course. And to learn, for example, the Shipibo Kanibo, it had been, I should have fact checked just before this to remember the exact numbers, but it was around 60%, if I remember correctly, of the population were wiped out by the conquistadores, of the Shipibo Kanibo tribe. 60% were wiped off the face of the planet, murdered, and the rest were enslaved and turned against each other, and many used and exploited their own people, and horrible situation. And you're there in their towns and villages and seeing how missionaries are still operating, and how what the kind of effects that the schooling system is having that neocolonialism is still very much happening. But it was only about 60 years ago that they achieved more independence. And I had that very raw experience of feeling that very, very profoundly. Being in those ceremonial spaces, there was so much my intention being to heal myself, but then emphasizing properly with those that were doing the healing, those that were facilitating the space for the healing. And it was very painful, and it was a real sort of moment of waking up, a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Because there will be many Spanish people in those spaces as well. I wonder how many connect to that, the reality of this really not very long ago at all, still very present reality of the kind of tensions and unconscious exchanges that are happening as a result of what we've all been conditioned into by coloniality.
Were you able to share that with the people you're working with? How?
I had some of those conversations.
Yeah.
And there were moments in ceremony that certainly I felt what was happening was a great deal of light work was occurring that was to do with exactly that history, and what emotionally and physically was still in existence in both of us as a result. And definitely in them, that this distinct moment, I felt like I could give something back in the form of a great deal of love and a great deal of appreciation and a great deal of awareness of the history, and a great deal of empathy with them in return. That was my feeling anyway, that this for me to explore and to learn a great deal more about before I can speak about it with any proper authority. But it's my conviction that it's truly one of the most important works of my generation, of the next generation. So, is the decolonial healing process, not just education and decolonial work, but decolonial healing, because it's in the heart, and it's the spirit, and it's the soul, and it's the mind. And
it's epigenetically in all of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, our work as individuals and as a collective.
Mm-hmm. And the way is a great deal of education, I believe, and the internal work, and the combination, an immense amount of a really sincere love and an appreciation and connection for one another and for ourselves and for the reality of the history.
Mm.
You know, for the reality of the history embraced, accepted, realized, not hidden from, maybe not necessarily the history itself loved, but ourselves being descendants of that history, instead of there being the embittering and imprisoning and corrupting and torturing shame complexes that are involved, the guilt that is involved, instead of all of this. And that's hard, really hard and really profound. Instead of still being caught in the mechanisms that come out of all of that, we're liberated from it and are able to really properly come back to the heart and freedom of expression and connection and collaboration.
Gosh, it's so much work to be done.
I think the reason why it feels so massive and why so many get into denial about it, you know, and will react with some hostility against it, in the same way that people will really react with hostility if anybody even very gently suggests that they might have some racist mentalities that are continuing within them. it's because certainly with my experience, it's important to face a lot of darkness, a lot of historical darkness, to witness it, to understand it, to realize that it's alive within us, within our energy fields, within collective consciousness and unconsciousness. It's still here, it's still alive, it's a reality. So to face it, to go through it, it's very hard to do. But it's absolutely doable. And to come out and to come to the light at the end of the tunnel.
And it's absolutely necessary.
Mm-hmm.
If there was one lesson, and you've talked about so much, but if there was one lesson that you would like to share with listeners that you would really want to impart, what might that be?
First thing that comes to mind is that the healing work, the deep healing work that is necessary for both men and women when it comes to histories of misogyny and of sexist abuse and exploitation and all of the weight and the horror of history that's still very much alive with us in similar ways. The healing work that is to be done there for us as individuals and in collectives, and the decolonial, the anti-racist work, they're really connected, and it's really important to be doing them both at the same time. We talk about that as in reviews of phrase intersectionality, to have the proper awareness that all of them are molded into they meet at many crossroads in psyche and in consciousness and in study and in research and work and ceremonial healing and formations of culture. I think you can't really have one without the other, because of the reality that it's immense. I guess I can leave it almost at that, but obviously, you know, the most depressed and where the most epigenetic trauma lies is in the indigenous woman. You know, that's where the most stealing and exploitation has happened, the most abuse, and that lives on in all of us. All of us have that. It's affecting our bodies and our way of life and our energy fields and our conditioning as human beings. Is what's happened and what's been taken from, what's been corrupted in the indigenous woman, archetypally speaking as well as ancestrally speaking. That's a real epicenter, I feel, of the healing work that has become necessary as a result of the horrors embedded in so much colonial history. And a big source of the healing work we have to do now. Absolutely. Really, really well said. What question haven't I asked which you wish I had? I suppose we could speak a little bit more about the Icaros. and about the Bibo Kanibo traditions and their, you know, I didn't think to bring it up when you were asking me about chanting and drumming and the use of the voice, because of all of the different musical forms that I've come into contact with and that I've studied, the ikaros, the songcraft that they are, I've never experienced anything more potent and powerful, both you know, being in the space of having partaken of the medicine, of having had ayahuasca, but also just the witnessing, and also just I have, you know, some moments when I was recording the Ikaro that ended up being used in Tar, the film, for example. We didn't hold it in a ceremonial space, really. We had some deep intentionality to that moment, that's for sure. But I got to hear them out the space of ceremonies also and feel them. And every time I listen to that particular recording and other recordings now, I'm overwhelmed. I would describe it as spiritual surgery somehow. Those songs, it feels like they go deep into your unconsciousness, into your body, and shift things and open things up and allow things to be released and vibrate things into a better structure. All things that definitely couldn't be very well proved by empirical data. The only moments in my life where I've had really strong experiences of synesthesia, when I've been able to see an emittance of a sound in bright colors and bright patterns and movements through the air, and in very strong visions of particular figures moving through the air and coming to me and doing the experiences I had with the Ikaros. I will never forget just how they made me feel. And I've studied them in some depth since, and know that it's going to have an important part of my life. And in certain things I've got to in certain elements of research that I'd like to make, and I'd like to. And it's funny, I was talking earlier about how it's often important that chanting is in rhythmic cycles for the sake of us really rhythmically connecting to the space. Often ikaros can be quite rhythmic, and sometimes they mount up to the point where they become really rhythmic, and with the use of a shaker, not with the drum, just with the ikaros. But then often they wander as well, wander in expression and in color.
And is music a way for you to almost explain and explore and bring that into the kind of 3D world in a way that language never can? I mean, language, it just isn't possible to then be able to bring those experiences back.
Of course.
Music is a
Yes.
way, it's a vehicle for you to connect those two worlds.
Exactly, yeah. I think I'd only be able to answer that question from music, you know.
But it can be answered, you know, it can be felt. You can bring some of that down to the people, to the ears that then hear the magic that you play.
Absolutely. Spaces are created for us to be able to communicate with one another that I think is almost infinitely more profound than we can with words. And if that is, and those who are living lives where they haven't realized that yet, where they haven't come into contact with that yet, where they haven't been able to express themselves and make that communication themselves to others, and then listen in response and have a conversation in that way, I feel like something's really being missed. So you asked me about what I think the future should look like, and I think it's a lot more people able to communicate in that way, with that level of with that depth of the human existence and experience being properly exchanged. I think it should proliferate massively. Many people should be able to have that gift and that talent and that liberty.
Well, that is a wonderful hope for the future. And I very much hope that that does manifest. ZackieL, thank you so much for your time today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I've so loved our conversation. And hearing about your journey and your incredibly wise words. Thank you very much.
It's been a real pleasure sharing with you. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I'm sure we're gonna have plenty more to exchange, and it's definitely my hope and my prayer and my trust that this kind of work goes far and wide and grows immensely, and there are many people that get to tap into not just the idea of these experiences, but the raw experience.
And where can people find you?
So my Instagram is the best way to have a good idea of the kind of work that I'm doing at the moment, and that's ZackieL, ZackieL, with two underscores on each side of the name.
Great, amazing. Thank you very much.
Of course, ZackieLmusic.com.
Brilliant, great. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to The Psychedelic Couch. For more episodes, please follow me on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts, and find me on Instagram at The Psychedelic Couch and at Claire Faulkner Therapy, where I will be keeping you up to date on the latest episodes and information surrounding all things therapy, psychedelics, and expanded states.